For years, the world believed they knew the story of Rocky Dennis, the brave boy behind the film mask, the inspiring teenager who refused to let a devastating condition define his life. But behind the movie, behind the headlines, and behind the public image, there was a far more complicated reality. Before her own death, Rocky's mother, Rusty Tullis, opened up about the struggles, tragedies, and painful truths that rarely made it into the spotlight. From the loss of both her sons to the difficult decisions she was forced to make, Rusty revealed a side of Rocky's story that very few people had ever heard. The rare condition no one understood. Roy Lee Dennis, who the world would later know as Rocky, was born on December 4, 1961, in California. On paper, everything seemed normal. He was welcomed into the world as a healthy baby boy by his mother, Rusty, and the man who was listed as his father, Roy Dennis. But the family story already had a complicated twist. Roy Dennis was not actually Rocky's biological father. That kind of unconventional beginning wasn't unusual for Rusty. Her life had never followed a traditional path. Growing up, she had once imagined a very different future for herself. As a little girl, she believed in fairy tales and dreamed of becoming something larger than life. Heroes like Wonder Woman or Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. But real life moved in a far less predictable direction. By the time she was 13, she had already been expelled from junior high school for truancy. At 14, she was smoking marijuana and spending time around biker gangs. By 15, she had dropped out of school entirely and was working as a hoochie-coochie dancer at Coney Island. Her life continued at that same breakneck pace. At 17, she briefly married a truck driver named Tommy Mason, and the relationship resulted in the birth of her first son, Joshua. The marriage didn't last long, and Rusty soon found herself chasing new opportunities. At 19, she joined a motorcycle stunt team called Speedy Babs and his Cyclettes. The job ended abruptly when the group discovered she had developed a dependence on amphetamines. Eventually, she returned once again to Coney Island, this time working as an exhibit hawker. It was there that she met Roy Dennis, a painting contractor who would eventually become her husband. In 1959, the two of them relocated to Covina, California. For the first time in Rusty's life, things began to resemble the traditional middle-class lifestyle she had never quite managed to hold on to. To Joshua, those early years felt normal enough. He remembers being a Cub Scout and growing up in a house that, from the outside, looked just like any other family home in the neighborhood. His mother cooked dinner every night and did her best to keep the family together. He was also honest about the reality behind the scenes. Rusty struggled with drugs during that time, but in his eyes, she was still a good mother. She made sure her kids were fed, cared for, and protected. Their home may not have looked like the polished families seen on television shows like Family Ties or The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. But Joshua later pointed out that he didn't know any families who actually lived like that anyway. Many households had their own hidden struggles. They just happened to come in more socially acceptable forms. When tensions rose between Joshua and his stepfather, Rusty always stepped in to defend her son. She remained fiercely loyal to her children, even when the rest of her life felt chaotic. From the outside, the Dennis family appeared to be living the American dream. They had the house, the neighborhood, and the sense of upward mobility Rusty had spent her whole life chasing. Yet, according to Joshua, once she finally achieved that vision, it slowly slipped through her fingers. Sometimes, when people finally reach the life they always wanted, they realize it isn't quite what they imagined. For the first 2 years of Rocky's life, nothing seemed unusual. He was a bright, healthy little boy with blonde hair and the kind of smile that immediately caught people's attention. No one suspected that anything might be wrong. Then, shortly after his second birthday, a routine doctor's visit changed everything. Rocky had been taken in for something simple, an ear infection. During the examination, however, doctors noticed something unusual. The bridge of his nose hadn't fully formed. At first, no one thought much about it. Many toddlers have slightly underdeveloped nasal bridges at that age. But not long afterward, Rusty began to notice something alarming. Rocky's head seemed to be growing larger at an unusual rate. At first, she tried not to panic. Her family, as she later joked, had always been full of hypochondriacs, people who worried about every possible illness. Rusty, however, believed in something very different. she had convinced herself that the human mind had the power to influence the body. If people could make themselves feel sick, she believed, then perhaps they could also make themselves well. But the changes in Rocky were impossible to ignore. The first real clue came from an observant X-ray technician who spotted a strange irregularity in Rocky's skull. What initially appeared small soon revealed something much more serious. Further tests showed that the bones in his skull were thickening rapidly. At UCLA Medical Center, specialists eventually identified the cause. Rocky had an incredibly rare genetic condition known as craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, sometimes called Lionitis, because of the way it can reshape the face. The disorder is caused by a mutation in a gene responsible for regulating bone growth. Under normal circumstances, the body produces a protein called sclerostin, which essentially acts like a braking system for bone formation. It tells the body when to stop producing new bone tissue. In Rocky's case, that braking system simply didn't work. Without the signal to stop, the cells responsible for building bone continued producing layer after layer of extra tissue. Over time, this caused the bones in his skull and face to thicken dramatically. The condition often begins showing symptoms in infancy or early childhood. As the skull grows heavier and thicker, it can begin to compress the tiny openings in the bone that allow nerves to pass through. This pressure can gradually damage the cranial nerves, leading to hearing loss, vision problems, and even paralysis in parts of the face. The pressure inside the skull can also trigger severe headaches, seizures, and swelling behind the eyes. And the effects don't stop at the head. The disease can impact the entire skeleton, causing thickened ribs, shortened stature, and breathing difficulties due to narrowed nasal passages. Blood tests often show unusual chemical changes, including elevated levels of certain bone-related enzymes and hormones. For doctors studying the condition in the early 1960s, the prognosis was bleak. At that time, only a handful of cases had ever been documented in medical history. Based on those cases, specialists warned that Rocky would likely become blind and deaf as the disease progressed. They also feared that the weight of his skull might eventually compress his brain, leading to severe neurological problems. Their prediction was grim. They believed Rocky probably wouldn't survive beyond the age of 7, but they hadn't accounted for Rusty Dennis. Rusty was not the type of person who accepted limitations easily. Tough, street-smart, and fiercely independent, she refused to let doctors define her son's future. Her philosophy was simple. If Rocky was going to face challenges, then he would face them head-on while living as normal a life as possible. She never tried to hide his condition from him, and she certainly didn't allow other people to treat him as if he were fragile or incapable. Instead, she encouraged him to develop resilience and confidence. She was always searching for ways to help him, experimenting with everything from vitamins to unusual dietary remedies. Whenever Rocky complained about headaches, which happened often, Rusty had a unique approach. Instead of immediately treating him like a patient, she would send him to his room and tell him not to come out until he had made himself feel better. Hours later, he would usually emerge smiling again. To Rusty, it was a lesson in mental strength. One day, Rocky came home from school in tears after other children mocked his appearance. Rusty responded in a way that perfectly captured her outlook on life. She told him that if people laughed at him, he should laugh right along with them. If he carried himself with confidence and saw himself as beautiful, eventually others would see him that way too. It was a mindset she lived by, and she made sure her sons grew up believing the same thing. When Rocky reached school age, doctors advised Rusty to keep him out of mainstream classrooms. They believed the physical and social challenges would be too difficult for him. Rusty ignored the advice completely. Instead, she enrolled Rocky in public school and raised him just like any other kid in the neighborhood. One of the most defining moments in Rocky's childhood happened during a trip to Las Vegas when he was 7 years old. While walking through the lobby of the Hacienda Hotel, Rocky noticed a woman with dwarfism passing by and began giggling. Rusty didn't scold him. Instead, she used the moment to teach him something important. She calmly asked him if he understood now why people sometimes reacted to him the way they did. Rocky, whose own appearance had already begun to change because of his illness, quietly nodded. Then Rusty gave him a piece of advice that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She told him that while many people might look similar to one another, no one in the world would ever look exactly like him, and that was something he should be proud of. Inside Rocky Dennis's extraordinary life. Despite everything working against him, Rocky Dennis's daily life often looked surprisingly normal. His days were filled with schoolwork, homework, and the routines most kids his age dealt with. And academically, he wasn't just keeping up, he was excelling. That was particularly remarkable considering the obstacles he faced. Because of his condition, Rocky's vision deteriorated quickly, and he was eventually declared legally blind. Reading and writing were incredibly difficult for him. But Rocky found ways around the problem. Instead of relying on sight alone, he leaned heavily on his memory. Over time, he developed an extraordinary ability to memorize large amounts of information. Teachers were constantly amazed by how quickly he could absorb facts and recall them with precision. When Rocky reached junior high age, the school district attempted to move him into a separate school for children with disabilities. At the time, Rusty was working long hours as a dancer at a go-go club in Azusa, and school officials believed they could quietly make the decision without much resistance. Their reasoning focused less on his intelligence and more on his appearance. Rusty refused to accept it. She pushed back hard, arguing that there was nothing wrong with Rocky's mind and that the district was simply trying to remove him from regular classrooms because his appearance made other parents uncomfortable. She fought the decision relentlessly until the school finally backed down and allowed Rocky to stay. His academic journey was not a straight line. It took him 2 full years to complete first grade, largely because of the challenges his vision created. But once he found his rhythm, he made up for lost time. Eventually, he advanced quickly enough to skip 7th grade altogether. By the time he graduated from junior high school, Rocky had not only kept pace with his classmates, he had become an honors student. Equally important, he had learned to accept the physical changes caused by his condition. Instead of withdrawing, he developed an incredible ability to connect with people. Those who knew him best often said the same thing. Rocky had a gift for making others laugh. His humor made people comfortable, and it helped him build friendships almost everywhere he went. Rusty played a huge role in shaping that resilience. She understood that the world was not always going to treat her son gently, so she prepared him for it. Her parenting style was direct, sometimes blunt, but always aimed at helping Rocky face reality with confidence. One story captured her approach perfectly. When another child once asked her why Rocky looked so unusual, Rusty didn't react with anger or embarrassment. Instead, she responded with a bit of clever humor, telling the child she doubted he had ever ridden in a spaceship. Rocky later looked at his mother in disbelief, realizing she had just implied he might have come from outer space. Rusty calmly clarified that she hadn't actually said that. She had only suggested the other kid had never ridden in one. Moments like that taught Rocky how to navigate uncomfortable situations with humor rather than shame. Rusty even had to take a firm stance with her own family. Her father, a tough truck driver from Brooklyn, constantly wanted to spoil Rocky because he feared the boy might not live long. Rusty pushed back on that idea as well. In her mind, Rocky might also live, and if he did, she didn't want him growing up entitled or sheltered. Looking back years later, Rocky's older brother Joshua believed their mother had been exactly the parent Rocky needed. Many families in the same situation might have wrapped their child in constant protection, shielding them from the world. Rusty did the opposite. She gave Rocky independence, confidence, and a strong sense of identity. That confidence began to show in unexpected ways. Joshua remembered coming home one afternoon to find Rocky sitting on a street corner like he was running a small business. But instead of lemonade, Rocky was selling his own toys. While Joshua joked that he was usually busy breaking his toys, Rocky had already figured out that they could be turned into profit. Even at a young age, he had an eye for opportunity and a natural love for making money. Rocky's charm followed him everywhere he went. When he attended a summer camp for children with disabilities in Southern California, he quickly became one of the most popular kids there. By the end of the camp session, he returned home carrying an armful of trophies and awards. Campers had voted him best buddy, most good-natured, and friendliest camper. But if there was one holiday where Rocky truly thrived, it was Halloween. Every year, he would lead groups of neighborhood kids through the streets for trick-or-treating. And he had a favorite prank he loved performing for the neighbors. He would arrive wearing a mask like everyone else. Then, after removing it, he would pretend there was still another mask underneath. Tugging at his own face, he would act confused and frustrated that the second mask wouldn't come off. It was a dark joke, but it broke the tension instantly. People laughed. The awkwardness disappeared, and Rocky almost always ended the night with the largest bag of candy. For him, humor was more than entertainment. It was a powerful coping tool. Comedy allowed him to disarm people who felt uncomfortable around him and gave him control over situations that might otherwise have been painful. By the time he reached his teenage years, Rocky had developed a strong sense of identity. His condition continued to reshape his face, and the physical toll was undeniable. At one point, a plastic surgeon even offered to perform an operation that might make his appearance look more typical. Rocky declined the offer. He had already accepted who he was, and he didn't feel the need to change that for anyone else. Still, the world could be cruel at times. Some kids mocked his appearance, and he often found himself dealing with adults, teachers, doctors, and strangers who assumed his condition meant he was limited or incapable. But Rocky rarely allowed those assumptions to define him. Outside of school, he developed a deep love for baseball. While his health prevented him from playing the sport, he became completely absorbed in collecting baseball cards. The hobby quickly became his gateway into friendships with other boys in the neighborhood. His knowledge of the game was incredible. Rocky could recall statistics, player histories, and obscure trivia with astonishing accuracy. Even when he couldn't join a game physically, he was always nearby, offering commentary from the sidelines. His observations were sharp, funny, and often surprisingly insightful. Friends like Eric later remembered how inspiring Rocky's attitude could be. After school, the two of them would spend hours talking about music, sports, and everyday teenage life. Rocky's illness was simply one part of who he was, not the defining feature. Rusty kept a collection of the evidence from those years: school awards, trophies from Camp Bloomfield, and certificates recognizing Rocky's achievements. She never kept them out of a need to prove anything. Instead, they served as reminders of the joy Rocky had brought into the lives of so many people. Against every prediction, Rocky continued living well into his teenage years. A major part of that resilience came from the mindset his mother had instilled in him from the beginning. Still, maintaining anything resembling a normal life meant constant medical monitoring. In the 1970s, there was no treatment that could cure his condition. Doctors could only manage the symptoms and track the disease as it progressed. Every year, Rocky spent a full week at the Medical Genetics Clinic at Harbor UCLA Medical Center undergoing extensive testing. Doctors carefully monitored his hearing, vision, and neurological health as the bones in his skull continued thickening. The disease progressed quickly. By the age of 6, his vision had deteriorated enough for doctors to classify him as legally blind. The number of appointments alone illustrated how serious the situation had become. By the time he turned 7, Rocky had already visited eye specialists more than 40 times. One moment from those appointments became legendary among the people who knew him. During one exam, a doctor told Rocky bluntly that because his vision measured around 20/200 to 20/300, he would never truly be able to read or write. Rocky responded by picking up a book in the room and beginning to read aloud. In that moment, he demonstrated the stubborn determination that had defined his life from the start. But even Rocky's remarkable spirit couldn't stop the disease forever. As he entered his mid-teens, his health began to decline. The headaches that had followed him for years became more severe and more frequent. His energy slowly faded, and his body grew weaker. Rusty noticed the change immediately. She had always been closely attuned to her son, and she could sense that the long battle they had fought together was nearing its end. By the fall of 1978, the situation had become critical. About 3 weeks before his death, Rocky's headaches intensified dramatically, and he eventually had to begin using a wheelchair. Rusty informed doctors that if the situation worsened, Rocky did not want to be kept alive by machines. His wish was simple. He wanted to remain at home. On the night he died, the house was filled with life rather than silence. Rusty and several of their biker friends gathered together in an effort to keep Rocky's spirits high. It felt less like a vigil and more like a celebration of the life he had lived. Around midnight, Rocky woke up complaining of another severe headache. Rusty comforted him the way she always had and told him to go to his room and rest. The next morning, Rusty was not home when the moment arrived. She was at a lawyer's office dealing with the aftermath of a drug-related arrest she insisted had been a misunderstanding. It was her partner at the time, Bernie, who would later become her third husband, who made the call to deliver the devastating news. On October 4th, 1978, Rocky Dennis passed away at the age of 16. According to Rusty, when she finally saw him, his face carried an expression of calm and peace. In the weeks that followed, grief took its toll. Rusty and Bernie's marriage collapsed just 6 weeks after their wedding, strained by the emotional weight of losing Rocky. The ending of Rocky's story also differed from what many people later saw in the film, inspired by his life. In the movie, he is buried with baseball cards placed among the flowers at his grave. In reality, Rocky's body was donated to medical science. After researchers completed their studies, his remains were cremated. Rusty explained the decision in her characteristically blunt way. In her view, there was no real use for a body once life was gone. If science could learn something that might help someone else in the future, then the choice made sense. Medical examiners later confirmed that Rocky's death was caused by advanced complications from craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. As the disease progressed, the bones of his skull had continued thickening until they placed overwhelming pressure on the brainstem, nerves, and surrounding blood vessels. Eventually, that pressure interfered with the body's ability to control breathing, leading to respiratory failure. Detailed examinations revealed just how extreme the condition had become. The dense bone growth had almost completely closed the optic canals, which explained the loss of his vision. Even the delicate bones within his ears had become compressed and deformed. The interior spaces within the bone structures had nearly disappeared as layer upon layer of new bone formed. There were no infections or additional illnesses involved. His death was simply the final stage of an aggressive disease that medicine at the time had no way to stop. Before her death, Rocky Dennis's mom revealed the truth about Rocky. Now, even though Rusty Tullis often projected a tough, fearless image to the outside world, the loss of Rocky hit her harder than most people realized. According to her older son Joshua, she struggled deeply in the months after his death. The strength she had relied on for years suddenly had to carry an enormous weight. Not long after Rocky passed away, Rusty and her partner Bernie quietly separated. She rarely spoke publicly about that part of her life, just as she kept most details about her biker friends private. But Joshua could see the toll everything had taken on her. Watching his mother struggle, he eventually stepped in and encouraged her to come stay closer to him. Even then, the two didn't live under the same roof. Joshua valued his independence and privacy, something Rusty never fully understood. Her personality was the opposite. She was naturally drawn to people who were struggling, the kinds of individuals others often overlooked. If someone was down on their luck, Rusty was usually the first person to offer help, conversation, or a place to sit and talk. In many ways, she seemed to mother everyone she encountered. But the grief over Rocky was still there, lingering beneath the surface. And soon, another crisis would arrive. Joshua, her firstborn and now her only surviving child, became seriously ill. By this time, Joshua had built a life for himself in San Francisco. He was openly gay and had been honest with his mother about it since his teenage years. Rusty had responded in her own complicated way. She cared deeply about her son, but like many parents of that generation, she initially struggled to accept what his future might look like. Part of her had hoped he might still be bisexual, mostly because she dreamed of becoming a grandmother. At one point, she even called him years later with an unusual request, asking him to consider donating to a sperm bank so she could still have grandchildren. Joshua declined without hesitation. Then tragedy struck again. Joshua was diagnosed with Kaposi's sarcoma, a rare form of cancer that became widely associated with the AIDS epidemic during the 1980s. The disease was aggressive and often fatal at the time. For Rusty, it meant facing a painful reality she had already endured once before. She found herself once again trying to encourage a critically ill child to keep fighting. Her outlook on life and death had always been blunt, even philosophical. She believed that life was unpredictable and that any person could be gone tomorrow, illness or not. To her, the important thing was living fully while the time existed. If someone had truly lived their life, she believed death itself should not be feared. Still, acceptance never meant surrender. Rusty fought fiercely to keep Joshua alive for as long as possible. Medical treatments were expensive, and the bills quickly piled up. In an effort to help cover those costs, Rusty made a difficult decision. She agreed to sell the rights to Rocky's life story for $15,000. That decision eventually led to the creation of the 1985 film Mask. The movie surprised many people in Hollywood. Produced on a relatively modest budget, it went on to earn more than $48 million at the box office. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Rocky's story had found a kind of triumph, but tragedy was never far away. Just 2 years after the film's success, Joshua passed away from complications related to AIDS. He was only 32 years old. Years later, reflecting on the loss of both of her children, Rusty shared a perspective that revealed how she coped with such unimaginable grief. People often told her how tragic it was that her sons had died so young. Her response was always the same. In her view, they had lived their lives fully, embracing every day and every moment they were given. That philosophy echoed the spirit of Rocky himself. Although the film Mask focused mainly on Rocky and Rusty, leaving Joshua largely out of the story, the message of living life to the fullest was very real. It defined the way Rocky approached his challenges and the way Rusty approached life itself. Like the character audiences saw on screen, the real Rusty Tullis lived fiercely and unapologetically. She loved motorcycles and the freedom they represented, spending much of her life riding with biker communities. That lifestyle also brought its share of problems. Over the years, Rusty had several run-ins with the law, most of them tied to drug possession. In 1996, she served 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to possessing methamphetamine. A few years later, police discovered drugs and paraphernalia in her mobile home, leading to additional charges. She initially received probation, but violations of that probation eventually sent her back to prison again in the early 2000s. Her final sentence ended in April of 2005. Her life was full of dramatic highs and painful lows. In many ways, it mirrored the spirit she had passed on to Rocky, a life lived intensely, without much hesitation. Rusty herself passed away the following year. In 2006, at the age of 70, she died from an infection that developed after a serious motorcycle accident. The crash happened in October while she was riding her three-wheeled motorcycle through an intersection in Azusa, California. Without warning, one of the tires came loose from the vehicle. Rusty lost control, struck a curb, and was thrown from the bike. She survived the initial accident but suffered 2 broken legs and several other injuries. Afterward, she was moved to a rehabilitation facility in Montebello to recover. For a while, it appeared that she might pull through. Then she began complaining of severe stomach pain and was rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors soon discovered that an infection had spread through her body. Her niece, Helen Cunningham, later said the accident almost felt inevitable in a strange way. Rusty loved motorcycles too much to ever give them up willingly. According to her niece, the only thing that could have stopped her from riding was something drastic. And eventually, something drastic did happen. At the time of the accident, Rusty had been separated from Bernie and was living in Glendora with her sister Dorothy and her niece. She had moved in with family not long after completing her final prison sentence. Those who knew her best often described her life as colorful, unpredictable, and intense. She had faced addiction, prison, tragedy, and loss, yet she continued pushing forward with the same stubborn spirit that had once helped her son defy medical predictions. Even after her death, Rusty's story carried a few unexpected twists. For a time, her remains remained at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office because no immediate arrangements had been made. Eventually, officials confirmed that she would be cremated, honoring the wishes she had expressed during her lifetime. Her family planned to claim the ashes once the process was complete. If they were not collected immediately, the remains would be held temporarily at Evergreen Cemetery in East Los Angeles. Rusty's niece later explained that the decision made perfect sense for someone like her. In fact, it reflected something Rusty had once said herself. She had never wanted to be buried. In her own unmistakable style, she simply did not want any dirt on her.